Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Josie's Point of View, where we focus on human interest stories from the Carolinas and beyond. Today's Sunday and it's July the 13th, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to my channel, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you find the information here to be informative. And if you're a return viewer, by all means, thank you for coming back. You know, I always say the tide changes so frequently here on these YouTube streets, so you always have to acknowledge where your support comes from. And I want you to know I sincerely thank you for your support. So feel free to like and to share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And our story today is coming out of Fort McNair in Virginia. Take a look at the headline. And it reads, Army Major sentenced to 53 years for multiple sexual assaults. I'll provide you with a summary here, and as always, I'll identify some of my sources for you in the description box. Well, you know, if by chance we as an Army had a wall of shame, this would be a case listed very close to the top, if not at the very top. It's the gruesome description of multiple violent crimes against women, all committed by an Army officer. And as shameful as it seems, we don't need to keep it a secret, just in case there are other victims out there or there are other similar cases where victims are debating whether or not they should come public. So in this video, we are speaking of Major Jonathan Batt, who faced a military court-martial last month, in the month of June 2025. His crimes against women are considered to be some of the most gruesome sexual abuse acts documented in our Army's history in quite some time. Now, the crimes he committed were primarily between 2019 and 2023, and most of the victims were civilian women he met on a dating app online while he was living in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I believe they said most of the women were civilian, but there was at least one soldier in the number. Batts was initially charged with 76 offenses against 20 women, including 14 counts of RAPE, but 5 of the women refused to testify, so he was eventually indicted in 43 charges involving a total of 15 women. But before getting into the details of this case, I want to begin with a bit of a cautionary note. Some of the contents of this video are sensitive for a few of my viewers. So as we move along the next few minutes together, if at any time you begin to feel anxious, please log off. And remember, you can always come back at a later date and pick up where you left off. So Major Batts had been in the military since 2007, and he's what you would consider a career officer, almost 20 years. In fact, about 17 he had already completed. Now, he was an infantry officer, and at the time of his arrest, he was assigned to the an intelligence unit, I should say, in Crystal City, Virginia. Now, he was married and the father of a young child. Reports say he met his victims on an online dating app and they voluntarily consented to go on dates with him. But they never consented to the sexual abuse. And as a reminder, 20 victims were identified over a 3-year period. Now, investigators say Batt often forced women into sex acts on his boat on the Potomac River, and the violence included tying up the victims or choking them into unconsciousness. These attacks began shortly after he was assigned to the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and he was transferred there back from Korea. So it makes you wonder whether there might be other victims in other assignments. And I say that because it's unlikely that somebody just wake up one day and decide they're going to begin violently attacking women. It's possible this pattern of behavior had existed previously. And I have to say allegedly because I don't know that to be factual. It was reported that the case began to unravel when women connected to a Facebook group called Are We Dating the Same Guy? They began sharing allegations, which prompted a 2-year investigation. So that 4-year time span is now beginning to make sense from 2019 to 2023. That included that 2-year investigation. Now, the first complaints against Bat was made to the Alexandria, Virginia Police Department, and when that civilian agency contacted the Criminal Investigation Division, or Army CID, and they've launched their investigation, additional victims were discovered. But wait a minute, I have questions. I am wondering whether Army CID had this guy on their radar screen and simply failed to take action in a timely manner. Yes, this is all alleged, but I think it's a fair question to ask. You have an Army officer in a very high profile job, probably considered Army elite, and thinking he was untouchable. And here are multiple complaints of sexual abuse over a very short time span. How come the Army did not know that one of their own intelligence officers had been out there abusing women? Or did they know and just failed to act? So, what happened during that 2 year investigation makes you wonder whether some of the pain and suffering of at least a few of the women could have been avoided if the Army had been adequately policing their own. Did they simply fail to act in a timely manner, or they just ignore his behavior? Why wait 2 years to make an arrest? And that's a question for which I'll probably never get an answer. And here is another reason why I am also asking whether or not there might be additional victims out there. This is what another author wrote about this case. It says the Army had a press release that got some minor coverage in November, and it certainly highlighted how many charges/victims were involved, but I think failed to really get the word out. All of the victims in this instance are civilians, which are the ones in this case right now, but I can't help but wonder if there are more or military victims at prior duty stations, such as he had been to Bragg, he had been to Benning, he had been to Stewart, he had been to Leavenworth. So again, did the Army really do a thorough job of investigating and finding victims? And are there additional victims out there who have yet to come forward? So Major Bat was arrested last fall and charged with 73 counts of violence against women. 73. And this is the summary of the information shared by military prosecutors was shared with the media. His charges included 14 specifications of RAPE, 20 of sexual assault, 3 of abusive sexual contact, 15 of aggravated assault by strangulation, 1 of aggravated assault by suffocation, 22 of assault commensurate by battery, and 1 specification of obstructing justice. And on October 20th, his case was recommended for a court martial, and he did enter a plea of not guilty. And despite the seriousness of these charges, Bat was initially placed and then released from pretrial confinement. As shocking as it seems, a military judge released him from custody, stating that the government had not demonstrated that a lesser form of confinement was inadequate to protect the community. I just don't understand that. How about that decision? Was he given special treatment? I'm asking. And I could only imagine the stress and the fear felt by the victims upon learning that he would be released from confinement. I wonder if that decision had anything to do with the women who elected not to testify against him. So fast forward to June the 2nd, 2025, the beginning of his military court-martial in a courtroom at Fort McNair, Virginia. A group of 8 military officers, 6 men and 2 women formed a jury, and they were in place to determine his guilt or innocence. And as I already mentioned, he had entered a plea of not guilty. Now, let me pause briefly to clarify any confusion as to where this court-martial was held. I read some places where it states it was held at Fort Meade. That's not the case. This is from the military, the Army docket, which talks about the case. And to the right, where it says court-martial summary results, it says clearly it was held at Fort McNair, and Fort McNair just happens to be in the military district of Washington. Reports say that some of the victims took the stand and recounted some of the graphic things that would take place during their encounters with Bat. Victims explained to the jury how Bat would choke them into unconsciousness using ligatures, which included rope and pillowcases that were tied around their head and neck. And in some cases, he would bite them before the RAPE or sexual assault, which included anal penetration, these attacks were brutal. And when it was their turn, Bat and his team maintained that the sexual acts were consensual, even the ones associated with choking and biting. They also asserted that choking is a pretty common sexual act. They also pointed out there had been communication with some of the victims after these attacks, and this was their way to justify that the encounters could not have been abusive. But the prosecuting attorneys fought back, telling the jury that the evidence showed Bat was a selfish, sadistic, and sexually obsessed individual who exploited his uniform and his rank to exploit his victims. Prosecutors stated Bat's never asked for permission. He never took no for an answer, and the only thing he cared about was his own sexual satisfaction. And it appears that panel of 6 men and 2 women agreed that the violence committed against these women could never be justified. They found Major Jonathan Bat guilty as follows: 2 specifications of RAPE, 4 specifications of sexual assault, 2 specifications of aggravated assault by strangulation, 7 specifications of assault commensurate by a battery, and 1 specification of obstruction of justice. And that military judge sentenced him as follows: confinement for a period of 53 years. That's right, 53 years behind bars, dishonorably discharged from the military, forfeiture of all pay and benefits. It's safe to say that Jonathan Bats will never again enjoy any type of freedom unless he's able to find it at Fort Leavenworth. So the sentence he received is equivalent really to a life sentence. Unless the miracle happens, he will die in prison. Now, there are many parts of the victim's testimony that were simply too graphic to describe in this video, so I simply touched on the high points. And even though the verdict and the sentence appears to be a victory, we need to keep in mind it's only a partial victory because some of the victims did not testify, and there's also the possibility that there may be additional victims out there who have not yet been identified. You see, this trial received very little coverage outside of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I live in one of the states where Jonathan Bat had a previous assignment, and I never saw a corresponding article published in any of my local newspaper, and I think it's very unfortunate. But at least we know that the military is beginning to take these cases seriously. Just a few weeks ago at Fort Bragg, a soldier was also sentenced, and he was sentenced to over 50 years for sexual assault. It seems like finally the military is trying to send a message that sexual violence will no longer be tolerated. And we need to give them credit, at least they're trying to move in the right direction. And that's all I have for you right now. Feel free to leave me a comment below and let me know what you think about this video. And by all means, feel free to like it and to share it. And if you haven't done so already, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking on that red subscribe button. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click on the bell that looks just like this one, that's the notification bell. If you click on that notification bell, you'll be the first to know whenever a new video is uploaded. I thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.